Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Untitled Marine Science Podcast in South Africa. With me, your host, Dr. Yanis Kiston,
and Dr. Nelson Miranda from Argonaut Science.
Yes, and I'm from Geekoscopy, as you can see on my cap. If you're watching, if you're listening, you cannot see my cap, so don't attempt to try, but you can imagine it. Just imagine I'm wearing a black cap with Geekoscopy written on it. In any case, in this episode, we are going to chat marine science careers, because why not just jump off the deep end with your first actual topic that you're talking about. And I think it's an important one because it is, if you are studying something as, I think, niche and as deep as this, you would want to figure out, like, how would you actually create this into a way of allowing you to pay the bills, which is very important for being a human being, in most countries at least. So what are your thoughts, Nelson, on careers in marine science?
Wow, so many thoughts. And I mean, we're talking South Africa specifically, isn't it? Even though it is a international sort of arena for this type of career, it's very common that you hear that people will travel overseas or to foreign countries and then return, or maybe not return, as part of their career in some sort of scientific and marine field, isn't it?
For sure, it is. I mean, there are global opportunities here, and the oceans are a very big place with a lot of things you can interact with.
And I mean, that's literally what connects us, is the oceans, and hence the economic, sustainability. That's really, we are an ocean economy. It doesn't matter what we do or what resources we interact with. Everything is connected, or is being transported at least via the ocean, and fundamentally, truly, all life is connected through the ocean. So one way or the other, directly or indirectly, we're going to have to go to the foundations of what a career should be and the economy, and what's that going to be? That's going to be the ocean.
yeah, for sure. So if you're studying... sorry, Nelson. If you're studying marine biology in bachelor's degree, an honors degree, master's degree, or even now in high school, which new kids are getting that opportunity... obviously, I think the primary one, and what like university kind of sets you up for, is just to become a marine scientist, which I think is it's pretty much what university is training you for, although you can use those skills and knowledge in other places.
I mean, and we're already talking about training and building skills for some sort of professional marine scientific field, and I mean, that starts very early with school level education in South Africa. And the good news is that there's already a marine science subject that is available, started here in Cape Town, at the Two Oceans Aquarium. The good people put forward, after much work going into it, they put forward the actual curriculum for the country. So it's starting small. There's only a few schools, but there's also adults and independent individuals that just want to take that subject, because it's a truly interdisciplinary sort of a subject that you can start already at that level of education, that it's a high school education. But it is complicated, isn't it? Because it's interdisciplinary, right? There are pros and cons when you start to look at it from the base. The pros is that, well, it's interdisciplinary, so you do start to build up skills that are transferable to different sectors. If you want to think about professional development, you want to end up in a job, and that job will fall under some sort of sector, whether it is the governmental sector or the private sector. Those are very, these are the sort of the jargon and the general groupings we use. But basically, you're going to have to work somewhere, and that work is going to contribute to something, right?
Yeah.
And
ideally, you creating a service, making a good, or working for the government in some way. You're gonna be doing something to pay the bills. So speaking about like if you were to become a pure scientist, like, okay, what kind of scientist opportunities would you get in that case?
Yeah, I think that is, if you are thinking about science in particular, you have to realize that there are baseline skills that are very important for all of science. And the first sort of skill that comes to mind is numeracy, or as it's known and maybe not loved, maths.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 you know. So I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, I'm not excited about maths," and that's usually a big obstacle for someone who wants to do some sort of science, whether it is biological, chemical, or other types of science. Social science is also a science, by the way, isn't it?
Once you are a scientist, like, what are the job opportunities we're looking at? Because obviously you could work as a researcher at a university, and become a lecturer and something like that. So you become a researcher at a governmental organization.
That's right.
Or a private lab, like for a pharmacy or whatever. So there's various things you could do in the ocean if you're studying, let's say, water dynamics. You could do something with, like, engineering. Or you could consult.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
That's a big one. Engineering is a big field, and there's a lot of demand. So we have to talk a little bit about not just what is, sort of very attractive and what there's a passion for, because I think at some stage everyone wants to be, what is it, a fireman or a fire person? I don't know if that's the correct term now. A doctor.
I just thought about it. It's like, maybe it's not fireman anymore. I don't know what it is.
It's a fire person, right? A fire person. It even sounds cooler.
But does that mean that the person's on fire?
Or a police person, isn't it? When we are young, we go through the phase. Or an astronaut, isn't it? Everyone wants to. A police officer, right? Or an astronaut. Or, of course, a marine biologist. Everyone loves marine biology, and everyone loves the ocean, generally speaking. And then what? You go into university, because it does require quite a bit of training, and you do a Bachelor of Science, right? And at that stage, once you complete 3 years of a Bachelor of Science, what can you do with that? What will the universities in the open days sort of tell you? They'll tell you, well, maybe you can be a school teacher, or you can be a technical assistant of some sort for a museum or a university or some sort of private institution that involves learning or research, or a non-profit organization, perhaps, isn't it?
For sure. Yeah, definitely. And if you want to, there's a lot of things that are involved with the ocean, because you could go out and like count fish and like count like algae and stuff like that, and that's more like a scientist job. But if you're working with anything to do with like logistics and like shipping and transport, that's an entire like sector called maritime. And
maritime.
You need engineers, and you need people to drive boats, and a bunch of other things that are not necessarily probably included in the marine science curriculum, but it would be good to have that knowledge that you are learning for those type of jobs. When you have anything with people involved, there's going to be like laws involved with that, because there should be things you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. So there are maritime lawyers, and law of
that's
the
a big
sea
one.
is its own brand.
Yep. So the engineers and the lawyers connected with the maritime industry, those are in high demand because the maritime industry is a high demand industry, because everything, all the products that we possibly can come into contact, they probably have been funneled through or have been in contact in some way, shape, or form with the maritime industry because of transport. That's why things are so cheap, and that's why we can get products across the world. It's because of international shipping, right? So that's where the connection is. That's why it's very valuable, and we've now grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle that is based on that industry, right?
Yeah.
So the whole world economy is based on that. Everything is transported over water cheaply in massive ships, right? But now you're a scientist. What if you're like really into science, and what's a high demand sort of job in science? Well, it will definitely have something to do with data, numbers, and things that are quantifiable. And even qualitative data can be reworked into quantifiable, sort of information. And so data scientists and statisticians, say that word really fast, those are actually in demand, and those are skills and jobs that can easily be transferable across different sectors and across different industries. So you may train for the marine field, but you may actually do the job well inland in some sort of aquatic or terrestrial related business, right?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's I suppose it's very, very fancy counting. You're counting things
Yeah.
and figuring out like how much there is and maybe how much time you have left before things hit the fan. So in that vein,
Yeah, but actually, if you think about it, we're becoming fancier and fancier because we have things at our reach these days, like smartphones and things like that. And we've become accustomed to getting a lot of things for free through these smartphones, like a lot of software. So software engineering is also a high demand field because we have to figure out all these numbers. So data scientist is very useful because you'll have to work on the back end, behind the scenes, to make all of your information make sense and make all your information available to you through these smartphones, right? Which it's become part of our lives, isn't it? So that's also why it's valuable, and that's also why you can see the scale of it. It's just huge.
yeah, for sure. And speaking about like counting stuff, you and I are more on the like ecological side. So like our counting is more like counting what's already out there in nature and figuring out like what's happening there. But also scientists are involved with figuring out how much we can harvest from the ocean before
That's
whether
right.
it's sustainable or not. So most of those are fishery scientists, and they go out on boats and count how much fishermen are catching, or they interview fishermen and get surveys and stuff like that. So one potential thing is you could be a fisheries scientist or a fisheries observer on a ship.
Fisheries observer, absolutely. And it's a very interesting field because the fisheries observers have to work with sometimes cutting edge sort of technologies to assist them with their observations. So it can be a very interesting sort of career choice, and can lead to other things because you're at the forefront where you are playing with industry demand, with the consumer demand, and then with policies, international policies as well. So the rules and regulations for best practices, and you are right there in the middle of everything, observing everything and reporting as to whether things are actually the way they supposed or ideally should be. So your job will be very important to provide accurate reports of the real status of resources, which we have to either conserve or manage, or else we'll very easily deplete them and work unsustainably, so that this affects, of course, food security and very important, very valuable sort of things for us in our everyday lives again.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. Another thing that a classically trained scientist could do is consult with either companies or the government on how their either operation or their new building of something will impact on the environment before they build
Yeah.
it. So before they want to put, let's say, a farm or a factory, they need to
Yep.
get an environmental impact assessment, and that needs to be done by an environmental scientist. And if you are doing something that's near the coast or on the coast, you should have somebody who's trained in aquatic science to be able to give you that
Absolutely.
information that you need.
And we're talking now a postgraduate level of education. So once you finish your BSc, you want to do an extra year of what's called honors. And after you complete that usually a very tough sort of year, then you can go into the sort of management and conservation fields where you can work even for national parks, game parks. They can be private as well, and even conservation organizations. Or you can become a technical assistant to research institutes, labs, that sort of thing. And it's only at the master's level, right, afterwards. So that's another 2 years, maybe 3, maybe more, depending on what you are doing your master's on and how you are doing your master's, because your master's can be by research only, or it can be courses and research, right? You have options there depending on your institution and your path. And then you can go into consultancy, right? So it's really the master's and then thereafter the PhD level post graduates that are at the level where they will be, prepared to work in the consultancy field effectively, right?
Yeah. So you could either go through like the environmental science programs at universities and then do do a second major or a minor in marine biology, if you want to specialize that way with environmental science. Another thing you'll probably learn at university, even at school, is aquaculture, which is the wet version of farming. There is a drive to increase the amount of fish and other types of aquatic organisms that we can farm for overall food security, and to lessen the impact that we are having by harvesting stuff from the ocean. So options for careers is becoming an aquaculture manager, an aquaculturist, and an aquarist, which is more on the ornamental side. So if you
aquariums.
So if you want to work at an aquarium like Osaka Marine World or Two Oceans, that would be an aquarist. So that's the type of thing you would also begin learning in school, and now at all the way through to PhD level if you'd like. If we're thinking about like sectors and different like types of things you could do, other sectors include just like basic education. So you could just become a teacher.
That's a big deal, because educators, I mean, you can do it privately as well. There's tutoring services. There's a massive need for education.
You could be a public educator at an aquarium or some kind of lodge or many places.
Absolutely.
Definitely. You could get into the entertainment / conservation field with like wildlife documentaries.
That's very exciting. That's a very exciting field, because now more and more, especially in the African continent, and I must mention, the amazing work that youth are doing, right? So nature, environment, wildlife filmmakers. And this is, a group of dedicated people that are bringing up the youth of Africa, scientists and storytellers coming together to address the film industry, which can be a very lucrative sector.
For sure. And if you care about like animals a lot, you could just go into something like conservation, I suppose, maybe on the non-profit side. Or you could become like a vet for an aquarium or a
Yeah, and
farm or
that's
something like that.
another. Veterinary services are another very interesting sector, which where there's a lot of opportunity as well. That's for development. And you know, if you have, if you want to be a vet, you know, I think it's really important to already start associating yourself or understanding what vets actually do. So find your local vet, you know what I mean, and figure out what they do. And if you're a young person, perhaps there's internship or mentorship opportunities there. But speak to these professionals in the field so that you can get advice from people that are actually operating in an occupation.
Mm, mm, for sure. If you're into like gadgets and stuff, you could create instruments for measuring things in the ocean and the sea, which I think you had a little bit of a hand in doing.
Yes, we actually do prototyping. So that's called prototyping. So it's a major thing, but it starts with an idea that is an opportunity, and you make it into reality, create a prototype, and you test it, and you prove the concept, right? And that is a very interesting field for African sort of development, because the rest of the world seems to look at Africa a little bit down and say, oh, you know, these people, they're a bit far behind in terms of technological advancement, which is not true. Okay, African people are very innovative and able to do a lot with limiting resources, which is an invaluable skill that Africa should actually, everyone should learn from African people.
Yeah, for sure. I think the key phrase is there, like limiting resources, and like one of the things I think, like as you like age over time, you realize that sometimes like the most amount of creativity that you can have with something is when you are limited in some way, because then you have to like figure out like what can you do. I have like less options, and sometimes
Yes.
having more options can be sometimes maybe like paralyzing, because like you don't know
Yeah,
what
it's you
direction to go in.
stagnate. Yeah, you
Yeah,
stagnate a bit. And then they say, you know, what is it? The uh, necessity is the mother of invention. You've heard
yeah,
that
yeah.
saying.
Yes, that's a good one. Getting very philosophical in this episode. uh Yeah, okay. On the I think law side, what we failed to mention is probably like policy. You could just get into government, become somebody who's a governing body, a manager,
Mm.
environmental manager, something like that, where you are creating laws or you enforcing them in some kind of way to protect the environment or protect socioeconomic value, anything like that
Yeah,
to do with the ocean.
protect people. That is actually
Yeah.
the bottom line. Is that the government is our stakeholder and our partner in everything that we do. Right? They are responsible for the baseline, the rules and regulations that we all abide. You know, and they create the peace that we need for us all to work and cooperate.
Yeah, so what other potential things could kids go into if they take a path in learning marine science?
I think that a lot of young people that I speak to think about it like this: I want to build up my CV, right? And then I'm going to apply for a job, and then I'll build my CV further and apply for another job, or pick a company where I can grow, isn't it? That
Mm,
seems to be the general sort of idea, or perhaps even they think, okay, let me do a lot of different jobs and gain experience in different fields that are of interest to me because I have a passion in it and I'm motivated to work in it, and then all of that will coalesce into my career. You know, my CV will somehow be enriched by all of these experiences, right? Um, and that's fair enough. That's a fair enough strategy. But there is also an alternative way of thinking, which is instead of building your CV so that someone or something provides you with a job, you, instead of thinking that way, you think, okay, how can I create a job, right?
Mm.
That can be scary, right? That can be scary, and that can be very exciting, right? And is it? And I mean, I don't think there is a manual for creating a job. You know, how do you create a job from nothing, or identify a job opportunity that didn't exist? Okay, I think that is naturally a very sort of scary and confusing sort of thought, isn't it? It's easy.
Change from person to person, from idea to idea.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm talking obviously about entrepreneurship, isn't it? And then should we be talking about entrepreneurship, and should we be exercising our entrepreneurship skills, regardless of whether we are going to end up getting a job from someone else and maybe slotting into a system that is stable and supports you, you know? Because there's usually this idea that entrepreneurship is associated with instability, you know, startups, you know, high risk, right? And but my question is, isn't that actually a normal part of any job? There's risk in every job, and not every job is, even the permanent positions, they're not actually safe, right? So there are things that can happen.
Especially not these days,
Right? There's things that can happen. We all have heard or been affected by, world-class, events like pandemics, and even other things like retrenchments, which have been, economies build and they fall back, and things happen, and there's jobs that were supposed to be secure sometimes are not, right? So that's a very scary sort of thing to think about. But I think we should be encouraged to think about that.
So you could, if you have significant knowledge about marine science or some aspect of it, you could either develop a product based on marine science and sell that, or develop a service to do with marine science or some kind of sector that's involved with it.
That's right.
Which is what you do, Nelson.
Yeah. So how to do that? Like I said, there's no manual, right? But there's a lot of scientific skills that actually go into that. You observe, right? That's your first step in the scientific process. So what are you observing? What are you looking for? You're looking for opportunities, not great. It's not ideas that you're looking for. I mean, ideas are helpful in being creative. Having a creative mind and having lots of ideas is, of course, very helpful, right? But what you're looking for are opportunities, which are perhaps those ideas, right, that actually are linked to some sort of revenue generation, right? So someone can afford. Someone has a problem, right? First of all, that's what you're looking out for. Some sort of
problems,
and that they would like solved, right? And they will actually pay you, that's the opportunity. So if your idea has to do with a problem that a customer may have, right, and where that customer actually can pay you to solve that problem, then you have an opportunity, right? And then you can start, again, those numeracy skills are so important, very basic. You can start saying, okay, how much resources am I putting in, and how much resources am I getting out? Because that's also determines whether it's a great opportunity or if it's not such a great opportunity. What is the scale of it? How many people have this problem? Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
How many people have the problem? How much resources does it take for you to solve that problem? Will they keep coming back to you to, keep working on that problem? And that's basically how you think. And this problem, another thing that I think is important to bear in mind is that this problem is usually tied in with ethics and with society, with the greater good for society, right? You don't need to look far. You're looking for within your community, right? So even if it doesn't matter your age, your income bracket, it doesn't matter any of that. But if you look around your immediate environment and you see something that, some sort of problem that you could contribute towards, and that improves the quality of life, say, of your community, you know. And this is hard to sort of talk in abstracts. So let's say you're in a area with water scarcity, right? So your community is running out of water, right? It's a problem, right? So how can we solve this problem? You know, the communities may not get along. That's part of the problem, right? They're not communicating with each other, so that different people are kind of solving the problem in different ways, and it's not a very optimal way of solving the problem as a whole for the community, isn't it? So then you may look at it and you may say, okay, what right now this is how things are, but what if we all had, say, a water tank, right? And we all had at least a reservoir that we could store water in. That would be part of the solution. Now, the problem is that we can't all afford one, isn't it? Right? We can't all afford one because they're expensive. But as a community, we could start a fund, right? That could benefit the whole community, and we could spread the cost, isn't it? Right? So that is literally how a non-profit organization could start to solve a very specific problem like that. And the profits are not for the individual, the profits are for the community. The ownership of the materials, it's not one person that owns it, but it's actually that community that owns all of those water tanks that you use to solve the problem, isn't it? And what do? You have to get quotes. You have to get quotes from people probably that make these water tanks or can source them within the community. So you see, you can actually, that's how they get a boost in the economy. So you are very smartly sort of finding the optimal way to use the pool of resources from the whole community to solve a problem for the community. And everyone actually, it's not volunteering, guys. This is not volunteering. You're spreading it's an economy, right? So you're spreading the value, because some people will be able to contribute more and others less, but overall everyone will get a benefit, right? So it's for example in the best interest of an organization or individual that is got a lot of liquid resources like money, right, to actually have their brand be on all of these water coolants, right? So they might say, sure, I'll pay for it, but then I want my brand to be there so that people know that I, and my organization cares about the environment, and my organization cares about this community. And then, so that's how negotiations go. So I think that should make kind of sense for ideas versus, opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it is something that maybe kids these days should look into, and maybe just try out things, taste different things, to find where your potential problems and opportunities are. I'm reminded now of a Japanese philosophy called Ikigai, that states basically like what you do should be based on three things, like what you would enjoy doing, what you can get paid for, and what is what is the third one?
So there's profession, vocation, mission, and passion, right?
Oh, there is four. Okay.
Yeah, because I remember the rosette, this Ikigai. The visual aid is this rosette of four circles that sort of.
So remind me what Ikigai is again.
All right. So it says, okay, so what you love, what the world needs, right? Yeah. What you can be paid for, right? Yes. And what you're really good at doing, right? You're
good at doing, that was what I was missing. Yeah.
That's it. So if you balance all of those, and that's actually a really good point. You may follow your passion because that's what you like to do. But what if you're really good at this one particular skill? You should balance that out, isn't it? In your studies, you should try to find a middle ground between what you are passionate about and what you are really good at, and work on that. And obviously there's also a strategy where you look at what you're not so good at, and you also work on that so that you try to improve on what you might not be good at. But if you have a talent or a scarce skill, it'd be good to take note of that and to enhance that, because as we become specialists, right, and we're all specialists here. Hey, Janus, you're a specialist, I'm a specialist, right? Yeah. And then the funny thing is, we're all special people, exactly. But here's the funny thing about being a specialist. Once you become a specialist and you're in a specialized field, you realize that there are other specialists. You know, you can even be more of a specialist. So it never ends. So within your specialized field, you can become a super specialist. And then once you realize that in that super specialized field, you can become a super specialist. It never ends.
There's another saying for that. The riches are in the niches.
and I think it comes back to balancing this. So doing what you love, and then balancing out with what you can get paid for. It's also smart, isn't it? Because people say, you know, you won't work a day in your life if you do what you love. Well,
yes,
you know,
exactly. It's still work.
There is that.
I could be doing nothing, because I'm not doing that.
There is that, but there's also boundaries, right? Boundaries are so important. You know, your personal boundaries and your professional boundaries. You know, that's the danger, is that when you do what you love and you do your job, do it as a job, the boundaries get, you know, blurred, and that can actually be a very negative thing for you. Over time, it can cause you to lose your passion for what you are doing.
You get burnt out.
You get burnt out, absolutely. So you have to be careful with this. And then, I mean, if you don't connect, if you do what you love and you do what you're good at, and you're getting paid for it, but you're doing something that's actually not needed by your community or by the country or by the world at all. If you're making, because everything's made up, guys, right? Everything's made up. And then we just realize, and we just agree as a society, as human beings, that this thing that is made up is real. Right? That's the basis of a lot of stuff that has humans put together, which is, it can be wonderful or it can be terrible. And it can be terrible particularly when you are doing all this stuff, but it's something that's not needed, right? You're getting paid for it, but it's actually unnecessary. So it's sort of, if you if you think about it, it can also eat at your soul, isn't it? So that's a kind of balance. Ikigai is a very, very nice model and a very nice concept to consult, isn't it?
For sure, definitely. I think that would be a good place to end the episode. We talked about a lot.
Excellent.
Any other overall thoughts before we end?
I think we will need to have to talk a little bit more about supply and demand, right? And in a further episode, because you have to think about how things are now and how things will be in the future, and that's tricky. That's a very tricky thing to think about. But certainly, just going on do what you love and what you're good at and what you're paid for is not enough. We also need to think about what is needed. Is there a demand? And is that demand, right, that what is needed? Are there people already, right, that exist in the labor pool that could address that demand? Because, of course, we're talking about a very serious thing in South Africa, which is there's a high unemployment rate. And that's something that we're all responsible for, right? And yet, there's a lot of people being trained. So something doesn't seem to match up. Where there's a lot of trained people, but there's, unemployment rate. What's going on? So it's a complex sort of issue, but I think it's important to maybe address it, talk a little bit about it.
For sure. So I think our next goal here is to kind of have a look at that kind of data and talk to people and figure out what would be recommend, I suppose, kids be thinking about getting into based on what we actually see on the ground. What's more realistic, I suppose.
Because, there's many sectors that we touched upon, many professions, but the environmental sector is a very complicated beast because it encompasses all of these sectors, right? And it's very difficult to track, right? The environmental sector could be its own entity, but it's actually made up of lots of different sectors and possible jobs and things. And that's also part of why it's so confusing for us to understand what is going on.
For sure. So, if you guys want to catch us on socials, I'm at geekoscopy.com or geekoscopy/geekoscopy at any social media. Where are you, Nelson?
I'm Argonaut Science in any social media.
Social media. All right. Here we go. Cheers.